partners were not to directly interfere with the songwriting and recording process. At first, Paul simply found this Asian woman overly demanding and controlling, but things gradually spiraled into madness. Yoko sat on an amplifier, interrupting the group's discussions, something no girlfriend had ever done before. When Paul suggested a melodic change, Yoko cut him off. When George Harrison tried out a guitar riff, Yoko interjected, "Too loud." Paul was stunned by her behavior. It was clear that Yoko wasn't just present, she behaved as if she were the fifth Beatle. Although frustrated, none of them dared to confront John Lennon directly. Paul, who usually took charge of organization and production, felt he was losing control as Yoko kept showing up, especially since John was increasingly coupling everything with her. John and Yoko signed letters together, and John even wanted to rename the band Plastic Ono Band. Paul repeatedly asked John, "Are you out of your mind?" He was terrified that the Beatles would lose their very identity. By late 1968, the atmosphere at Abbey Road was so tense that a single match could set it all off. On one side sat Paul, seething with frustration on the verge of exploding. Opposite him, Yoko clung to John, her gaze defiant. She mocked Paul's ballads as mere saccharine tunes while praising John as a genius breaking free from chains. But Paul wasn't the only one driven mad by her. George Harrison flushed red with anger every time Yoko spoke. Even Ringo Starr, the most easygoing of the four, when interrupted by Yoko, simply put down his drumsticks and left his seat. "You can stay, but I'm going out for a smoke." More than once, Paul gripped his bass tightly, wanting to throw Yoko out the window and scream, "Get out!" But he couldn't. John sat silently yet defiantly, his silence sending the message Yoko was staying, no matter what Paul or anyone else says. Later in interviews, McCartney compared those feelings to a kind of passive sulking. "We were just sniping at each other," he said. "We were just steaming." That attitude created countless tense moments. But Paul admitted the three of them eventually had to accept Yoko's presence because John loved her madly, and no medicine could cure that. After the press learned that Yoko Ono was interfering too much in the songs, they began to despise her. Paul McCartney felt this was the right time to get the band back on track. But surprisingly, it was John Lennon himself who begged Yoko not to leave him. When the press started publishing a dense series of articles criticizing Yoko Ono for butting in on the Beatles' recording sessions, the public backlash became unprecedented. The image of the woman who broke up the world's greatest band quickly stuck to Yoko's name. Many fans hated her so much they held up banners outside Abbey Road studios that read "Yoko, go home." In that atmosphere, Paul McCartney, who had long been annoyed by Yoko's presence, saw an opportunity. He thought, "This is when John has to realize she doesn't belong in the Beatles." But to his surprise, it was John Lennon who broke the silence. In front of the whole group, he took Yoko's hand, his voice with tension. "If Yoko goes, I go, too. She's here because I want her to be." That statement was like a dagger tearing through Paul's last hope. The opportunity he thought had arrived was gone, replaced by the brutal truth John was too deeply in love with Yoko. From that moment on, nothing could stop her from sitting next to John in every meeting and every recording session. For Paul, it was a bitter turning point. He understood that the war was lost before it had even begun. When the Beatles began to face financial problems in the late 1960s, Paul wanted the band to work with Lee Eastman, his father. Meanwhile, John, under Yoko's influence, chose Alan Klein. This dispute split the Beatles into two camps and became the direct cause of the group's eventual breakup. The discord wasn't confined to the recording studio. It spread to the public. Paul alluded to Yoko's control in some of his songs, while John and Yoko retaliated with biting interviews. In the album, Ram Paul included satirical jabs at John and Yoko. John later hit back on How Do You Sleep with lyrics directly attacking Paul. When John was assassinated in December 1980, the already strained relationship between Paul and Yoko became tenser than ever. Surrounded by reporters, Paul blurted out, "It's a drag." The short phrase was interpreted as a cold, indifferent attitude. The press ran with it, and Yoko saw it as proof that Paul had never truly respected John. Paul later explained he was just in a state of shock and couldn't say more. In 1988, when the Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Paul refused to attend, citing unresolved business differences with Yoko and the management of Apple. In the public's eyes, this was nothing less than confirmation that he and Yoko couldn't stand to be in the same room. Neither would budge to stand on the same stage to honor Jay's legacy. However, during the anthology project, Yoko made a conciliatory gesture by handing over John's unfinished demo tapes to the three remaining Beatles. This resulted in the creation of Free as a Bird and Real Love, a collaboration that symbolized a brief reconciliation. But this truce was just a thin layer of paint covering a wall of animosity. In the early 2000s, the flame reignited. Paul publicly revealed that Yoko had refused his request to change the songwriting credit order for songs he had written almost entirely. Most notably, Yesterday. Yoko flatly replied, "History cannot be rewritten." In 2002, Paul released the live album Back in the US and unilaterally changed the credits for 19 songs to Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Yoko's side was furious, immediately lashing out and accusing Paul of rewriting history to diminish Jay's legacy. This argument showed the bitter contempt they had for each other. Paul saw Yoko as an inhibitor who was distorting his contributions, while Yoko saw Paul as an arrogant person who wanted to steal John's spotlight. Was Yoko Ono to blame for the Beatles' breakup? This is a question that has haunted Beatles fans for over half a century. Many are adamant that Yoko Ono was the one who broke up the world's greatest band. However, historical documents from studio diaries to the members' own memoirs reveal a different reality. The Beatles had been fractured from within long before Yoko appeared. There were already conflicts among them, and several members had decided to leave. In later years, Paul McCartney confirmed that she was not the reason for the breakup, even though he disliked her unusual personality. According to him, the band was already on the verge of collapsing. She certainly didn't break up the group. The group was breaking up, he said. Paul McCartney believes that Yoko Ono's appearance was simply a catalyst for a change that John Lennon had long yearned for. In reality, their encounter was like a lightning bolt striking John Lennon's life. In November 1966, John Lennon coincidentally met Yoko as she was preparing for an art exhibition. At the time, Lennon was already a global star and a married man. Yet, he was captivated by the petite figure and long black hair that half covered the face of the Japanese artist. They fell for each other, despite judgmental stares. The press called Ono the woman who broke up the Beatles, and the public saw her as the third party in Lennon and Cynthia's marriage. In November 1968, John's first marriage ended on the grounds of adultery. But Lennon didn't back down. He made their love public. And for the next 12 years, John and Yoko lived in a relationship that was as passionate as it was scandalous. Yoko's appeal to Lennon wasn't just artistic. In her, John saw reflections of the strong women who had shaped his childhood, his mother Julia and his Aunt Mimi. It was the type of woman he both craved and feared, but could not escape. And Yoko Ono, with all her resolve and uniqueness, became a whirlwind that swept away every bit of order in John Lennon's life. Paul believed that John needed a major change in his life, and Yoko was the one to bring it. Paul also thinks that John's solo career with peace-themed songs like Imagine and Give Peace a Chance would not have been successful without Yoko. She was the muse who led John down an entirely new path. In the new biography, Yoko a Biography, David Sheff asserts that Yoko did not break up the Beatles. On the contrary, her presence and influence helped keep John, and to some extent the group, from falling into a crisis before the eventual breakup. The Let It Be and Abbey Road sessions could only be completed with Yoko's moral support. In the years following John Lennon's death in 1980, Paul and Yoko gradually reconciled. Paul collaborated on several projects to honor John, and Yoko publicly spoke well of Paul. But the scar from the final days of the Beatles remained, and his